Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We're here every week to walk you through how to understand trends and how to use them in a day-to-day basis and a long-term basis in your business to grow your business. And we oftentimes get asked the question of, number one, where do I find trends? Number two, how do we know if it's a trend or a fad? And number three, once we identify it, it's a trend. How do we know how strongly it is applied to my business? And that kind of brings us down a little bit to statistics. And I know, Adam, that you're an amateur, maybe even professional statistician. And so I wanted to kind of start the conversation with that and get your thoughts on why it's important to understand the numbers as it pertains to trends.
Well, first of all, every business should have some sort of a scenario plan in place for what they think the world that's important to them will look like in 5 to 10 years out. And then you should constantly update it. I got started doing this back before the turn of the century, back in the 90s. I was doing scenario planning for people. And I started saying, okay, this is where I think we're likely to head. And then what we do is we use the statistics that come along to change that, to enhance it or change the direction of what we think scenarios are. So that way we're making decisions based on the future, not the past. Now, but first you have to have a scenario plan. But then once you have that, then you can start to say, well, what are the statistics that are reported telling me? If you try to look at statistics in a vacuum, they're kind of meaningless, right? I mean, you have to have them put up against some kind of context, and that should be your future scenario. But I thought today, like you said, what we do is we take some statistics and say, okay, this statistic is reported. How do I put that in context, and what does it mean, right? And see if people could get a sense of how you apply these things in business. So this all came from the New York Times. They published an article last week that I picked up, and they had several highly qualified sources that put the statistics together. But the first one was patriotism. And one of the things they measured was they asked people, how important patriotism was to them. And in today's world, 2023, 38% of people said they thought that being patriotic was important. Now, if I take that and compare it to 1998, all right, so we back up the clock from 2023 to 1998, 25 years. At that time, 70% of people thought being patriotic was important.
Wow.
So it's down by 50%. Now then, let's take our business people and say, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? Well, one of the first things I would take a look at is, what does the word patriotic mean? And I would actually try to go in and say, well, let's get a definition of patriotic from a current source, and then take a look at what patriotic might have looked like 25 years ago. Do people define it differently? Now that we've had the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, we've seen the word patriot used in some ways that wasn't used before, right? We had people taking over the Capitol saying they were patriots. That wasn't what anybody would have thought of as a patriot 25 years before that. So the first thing I want to say is, are the words changing? Are the way we're talking about it? And the answer to that is yes. We see people now wrapping themselves in the flag kind of regardless of their point of view. You see the people that would be what we could call far right. They get very much wrapped around the flag. This is, I'm doing it for the American way of life. Same way, liberals on what we might call the far left are doing the same thing for the good of the country. Is how we want these things to happen. So the term patriot has taken on a very different meaning. Now, I graduated from high school in 1975. That was just after they did away with the draft. And so in my era, patriotism pretty much got related to, are you ready to go to war? Would you literally, when you're called up for service, would you put on a uniform and go to war? And that was a pretty difficult question at that time, because you had people that were pretty hostile about the war. Thought, okay, maybe we're in a war, but should we be in a war? And there was a lot of controversy and rioting. But the word patriot at that time really, really, really tied to, am I ready to put on a uniform of the United States and go to war? So that's the first thing. The term itself has changed. So when you ask somebody, are you patriotic? I think most people could say yes, regardless of their beliefs, right? Whatever philosophy they have. The second thing would be, how does patriotism rank in terms of other things? And so one of the issues here would be that it's not as important overall to think about people being in a uniform. And that could well be because we've had the all-volunteer Army, as we call it, the all-volunteer services now for some 45 years. And And now people don't feel compelled to go into the military. I mean, literally, if you think it's something you want to do, and I've met many young people that did, and they joined either out of high school, or they went to college, ROTC, or they went and got a degree and then applied to go into the officer candidate school. Those kinds of things. There are people for whom the patriotism is clearly important, and they have joined the military of volunteerism. But for other people, you don't even have to think about it. Again, wind it back to the 1960s, 1970s. If you were what we call the land grant college, meaning like Arizona State's land grant college, Wichita State, my alma mater, land grant college, you had to have an ROTC program. That was required. And many universities required that all males going to a land grant college took ROTC. And so that was the idea that we were preparing you to be able to be a lieutenant in the military upon graduation. And of course, that all went away. We did away with those requirements. We did away with the ROTC programs on almost all those universities. They're still out there, but nothing like it used to be. And so now what happens is you don't see that level of people talking about patriotism being required to stand up and work for your country in some particular way. So I think we overall say, okay, the view has shifted very dramatically. And so if I was, for example, somebody, I'd say from a marketing context, I would not recommend trying to use a highly patriotic theme for your marketing. Like we're the all-American sign company, or we're the most patriotic manufacturer of cannabis, or
Well,
something like
only
that.
except if you're trying to market to a very select segment.
But the problem I think you have today is that you don't know what the word patriot means. And so when you're trying to appeal in a patriotic context, you don't know how that's going to be picked up. You're going to have people that will pick it up with very different meanings. And it's going to be hard for you to identify what you really mean. So when you're wanting to brand your business, your small business, you want a name on it, and you want to go talk to people, be sure you're very, very clear. Now, if you want to be very pro-veteran, I think it's more clear to say that. We are pro-veteran. There are a lot of businesses that I see they offer discounts. Anybody who's a veteran, show us a card, you get a discount. There's thank you for your service comment on many times when I hear people give a talk. You can be more clear than use the word patriotic, is what I'm trying to get to. Be more clear, because the word patriotic doesn't ring with people anymore. And the symbols of patriotism don't have the same meaning to everybody. They have different meanings depending. Some people will see the person with a pole with a flag on it, and they'll think January 6th, right or wrong, or they'll think of perhaps Iwo Jima, right or wrong, right?
Right.
And there's so many images that are of the same image, but yet they have different meaning today. So I see this; it's just not important, and I would recommend people not use that as part of your marketing message unless you're very clearly going after the military, current serving or past served people in the military, and then I would be very clear about it. I wouldn't just use patriotic. I would say, we're trying to reach out to members of our armed services, former members of our armed services. Thank you for your service. We offer a discount if you'd like us to do your dry cleaning or whatever service that you may have. So again, one simple statistic like that can have a really big meaning because,
Okay,
as you said,
what other statistics are out there that are interesting for our viewers and listeners to look at as it pertains to them growing their business?
well, again, I like to look at really big trends, and next one is religion. Okay, in 1998, 62% of people in America thought that religion was very important to them, to the country, and to their lifestyle. Okay, 62%. And this year, it's now down to 39% of people think religion is important. And I think that again is something we have to be very aware that you could, there was a time I remember back around the turn of the century when Buchanan, there was a guy who ran for president. His last name was Buchanan, and he would always go on television. He would say the vast majority of this country are white Protestants, and then he would start whatever point he wanted to make. So, but he started all of his points. Pat Buchanan would start off with the majority of this country are center right, conservative, white Christians, and now you can't say that, right?
Right.
I mean, not you can't. You can say it with your mouth. What I mean is, it wouldn't be a true
Wouldn't be
statement.
true, right?
Yeah. What happens is people are many religions, right? Some people are Catholics, some people are Protestants, but then we don't even see that inherently loops it in. I talk to a lot of people who would say, I believe in some sort of a God, but I don't believe in organized religion. That's another common
Very
theme that
popular.
you hear people say. Yeah. So like I do believe in God, and I'll say, well, okay, do you read the Bible to get your God? And some people will say yes, and then some people say, well, I read a lot of different books. I not only read the Bible, but I read the Quran, or I'll go read the works of Buddha and Confucius, and so the what we see is the word itself, religious, is now a much broader term. It wasn't, yes, whenever the people came on the Mayflower, they were all Christians, right? And we can say that a lot of the early colonists, they were Quakers, they were people of Protestant beliefs, many of them, and they didn't find a happy home in England where they had to be Episcopalian or in Europe where they had to be Catholic. And so they migrated to the United States. But wow, has the world ever changed, right? Now
Yeah.
we have people, and we have a significant, population of people that are follow Islam. And we tried, I think oftentimes that gets ignored. It's kind of like, well, I don't know that that's an important part of our population, but it is. The fact that we have so many people that are so we have religion now is this very broad term, but it doesn't have the focus it had either. So whereas I don't know about you, Manny, but when I was a youth, I didn't know anybody who didn't go to church on Sunday, right? It just that was the way of life. It was you went to church or you went to mass on Sunday. Now, if just can have a conversation with your friends and you're not trying to act political, if you could just ask them, say, I'm just curious, when was the last time you went to a church service?
Right.
And they might say a long time, like years, and they might say, well, I go every Christmas or I go every Easter. We're coming up on Easter now,
Yeah.
and there's that old phrase: do you build a church for Easter Sunday? Because everybody comes on Easter, and you have an overflow crowd on that day.
Right.
When I lived in, I had a house in Las Vegas, and that house had it was about a block from a very large evangelical Christian church, and they literally, when Easter came, put up this enormous tent in the parking lot because they had so many people. They
Oh, the
overflowed the
overflow.
church
Yeah.
and it filled up.
No,
But
when I
but
was growing up, it wasn't as prevalent. I mean, it was prevalent. I grew up in a very Catholic community, being on the border. A lot of
yeah.
Mexican Americans are Catholic, so it was pretty sizable population. But me and my family, we weren't necessarily that religious, or that we didn't go to church very often.
So another example of this, when years ago, my wife Mary, she had a stroke. We get to the hospital, and one of the first questions they ask dudes when she's getting admitted is, "What religion are you?" Right? And they wanted to know, like, should we send a priest? Should we send a clergy of some kind? What religion are you? So a couple of weeks ago, Mary Lou had a stroke. I took her to the hospital, and then she transferred from hospital 1 to hospital 2 so she could get specialized care. They never asked that question. They didn't ask what religion she was, right? They weren't going to queue up a priest to come see her or something like that. And so, again, what I want to do is come back to what does the word religious mean to people? And I think for a lot of Americans today, the word religious means something like, do you just have a belief in something bigger than yourself?
Yeah.
And they'd say, yeah, most people would say, yeah, I have a belief in something bigger than myself. Because otherwise you're an atheist, right? And that's a pretty small group. That's a small niche segment, the atheists. So then you say, well, okay, what is that bigger thing? And then there's a lot more people kind of like unable to really describe it all that clearly, right? So now then what I would say is the word itself, are you religious, is a word we've got to be careful about how we use. And the second thing I would say is it's not in a country like America where we have so many different points of view around religion, it's again not a good term to be using in your marketing because it is confusing to people and they don't relate to it. They're not
Yeah.
sort of like, well, in old days, boy, we want to make sure that the proprietor of that shop is very religious. In fact, there's some pretty famous businesses. Chick-fil-A is one. And then, is it, I'm trying to remember, it's not Michael's, but a
Hobby
store like
Lobby.
Hobby Lobby, yeah, out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're closed on Sunday. Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, I think, are closed on Sunday because the owners, those are privately held businesses, those owners they want to be closed on Sunday. And I remember when I hear this, I go to them, I'm kind of like, boy, you're not very thoughtful when you say that because what about your employees that come from India that are Islamic, or your employees that come from other countries that have different religious beliefs? You're telling them that they have to take Sunday off when in fact they might not want to take Sunday off because of their religious beliefs. They'd like to have a different day. You're going to make them take Christmas off when, in fact, they don't celebrate Christmas if they're not Christians. So we're in this time of transition that started quite a ways back, and terms like patriotic and religious are no longer important barometers or mile markers that I would say somebody could use in terms of understanding where the marketplace is. And they're not good terms to be using for trying to describe who you want to sell to. Now, if you want to appeal to people that are Christian, I think you have to be much more specific and say, we're a Christian organization, and whatever benefit that has for you. But I think I would realize that you, in saying that, you're going to have a lot of people that might be turned off. Kind of like, why did you say that? Why is that important?
Right.
It's like that reaction to, why is Hobby Lobby closed on Sunday again? I don't
Well, I
quite
think
get
this
it.
goes back to one thing we do talk a lot about is understanding your customer. I mean,
Yes.
if you're selling Bibles, or if you're selling, a gospel supply store or whatever, I mean, you're clearly, your demographic is very, or your customer base is very clearly identified. But if you're trying to sell to a populace,
Yeah.
it's a different story.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. And I'm using those two as introductory ones to get to one that I think is just absolutely fascinating. And I wasn't able to reach back as far as I wanted, but in 2005, 37% of Americans said they were Republicans. They've actually said, I'm a Republican.
37.
Yeah, 37%. And if you asked, 35% would say they're Democrats. And 29% were undeclared. Okay. You can call it independent or undeclared, but they're neither Republican or Democrat. Okay. Today, so there's this shift. By the time we get from 2005 to 2010, then it's 26 Republicans. So it goes from 37 to 26. The Democrats go from 35% to 29. But the independents go from 29 to 42, right? So what we see is the undeclared, that independent group
Yeah.
ends up becoming quite a bit bigger. And today, so that's 2010. So now then 2013, it's 27% Republicans, almost exactly the same as it was in 2010. It's 28% Democrats, almost exactly the same as 2010, and 44% are independents or undeclared, almost the same as 2010. So for the last 13 years, we now see that we have a different form. Now, why is this important? I think it's important because we talk a lot about read the newspaper, get your data, see where it comes from. And I know that, for example, if I watch Fox News, they're going to say that they try to appeal to a certain Republican segment. That's 28% of the population, right? And then there's some others, like I think MSNBC. I don't know if they say it, but a lot of people believe that they're trying to appeal to the Democrats.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what did I say? That's 28% of the population. But who's the other? 44% aren't on either of those, right? No, I'm not saying right and left. I'm saying they won't even say that they're part of a party, right? So that means, first of all, they don't vote in primaries. That's the first thing. They don't vote in a primary because they can't. You have to declare a party to vote in a primary, so they can't even go do that. So that again, now that's starting to tell us something about not just politics, but we see all three of these statistics lead us towards where people are not where we hear, well, we're such an extreme country. I hear this all the time, right? How we're so polarized, we're so extreme, we're so far out there we can't talk to each other anymore. And in fact, these statistics tend to tell me something very different. They
Yeah.
tell me that, in fact, there is a commonality and there is a middle, or whatever term you want to use for it, the commonality, a middle, an organized group that have common thoughts. There are people out there. They're just not represented by some of the old terms we use. They're not, patriotic, religious, and Republican or Democrat are not terms that people identify with anymore. And so if you're out there trying to go build a business, you're probably smart to stay away from all of those,
Yeah.
right? And
Sure.
so when we say, for example, we try not to talk about politics on this show, that's why we say that, because we believe, you and I, that everybody can benefit from studying trends. And so that leads me to the point of you got to be really careful when you watch television or you pick up a newspaper for the bias. Because what happens is now they're trying to talk to one segment of the population, so they'll use the data in a certain way.
Hmm.
So I hear, for example, right now, former President Trump is being indicted, and if you turn on the radio, NPR, oh, look at what the polls have said, and I'm like, well, which poll? Are you polling Republicans? Are
Right.
you polling Democrats? Are you polling everybody? Are you polling independents? It's and that's part of the reason the polls aren't very accurate anymore is because the old ways of putting people in boxes don't fit. And a lot of people out there saying, hey, we don't fit those boxes anymore. I live in America, and I have a child that, I have a grandchild from a daughter or a son who didn't ever get married. I know my neighbor had a child who was afflicted with fentanyl. I know that my son that went to college got a pretty good job, but his brother who didn't go to college is struggling to make ends meet. I know at least four people who still have children living with them, and the children are in their upper 20s. So there's a commonality where these people, we're all talking to each other about these things, but the old labels don't fit very well
Yeah.
anymore. So as business people, we have to start to dig in deeper. Who's our local, like if you're selling in Tucson, who's your local community? And how do you try to make sure that you give them what they want? What are their needs?
Right.
And it's not going to be good to try to reach out for like religious needs of some of those old arms that we used to use.
Well, I think one thing that's really also important, Adam, that is the sort of elephant in the room, is that there's a multi generational aspect to this too.
Yeah.
You ask my mom, or I've got a relatives that are in their 80s. They're going to have a much different mindset and a much different uh, buying pattern, or the whole idea of religion, or R or D or whatever we've talked about here. It's going to be different than people that are just getting out of college. And
Yeah.
I think it's just really important. And what's interesting is that the buying patterns, that you might be 25 years old out of college, but you may not have the buying power yet that somebody who is in their 60s does.
Right.
So I think there's a whole dynamic there that also needs to be explored.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I can remember when I was young. Every once in a while, I would see people, a fellow with a hat, and it would say World War II vet, and probably have some slogan on it. And now today, I see people with Vietnam veteran caps on as I walk around, and it's thank you for your service. But we have to realize, the Vietnam War ended, 50 years ago, and here we are, with people that have been in the military. We've had a standing military ever since then, but it's very different. People don't identify the way they used to. You don't see people returning to have a Afghanistan veteran cap on, even if they were served in Afghanistan. So you have to be kind of more thoughtful about who is your marketplace and who are you trying to talk to, and how do you talk to them? How do you talk to them quite clearly? Because you want to position yourself along these trends, and you want to start saying, okay, I want to be where the people are headed in terms of what they're going to buy and what's going to happen. So let me give you another example. Unionization. Okay, here's one where people get really confused a lot. Okay, because they'll hear so. New statistic came out last week that 10.1% of the workers in the United States are unionized, which is a new low since we started to get unions back around 1900, right? We're supposed to be at a new low, 10.1%. That number is meaningless. And the reason it's meaningless is because in the public sector, 33% of employees are unionized. But in the private sector, it's 6.0% are unionized, right? And so, unless you're running a government agency where
Right.
you have a 1/3 probability that they'll be unionized, but I mean that's even very clear. You can go into police, fire, and you'll start to see very high percentages of unionization. But other sectors of the economy, you don't have that. HEW and places like that. So the reality is that unionization peaked, some 4 decades ago, and it's been going down ever since. And if you're in the private sector, that's true as well. And it's 6%. So when you see somebody like Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, and he was interviewed recently by Congress, and they said, "Are you trying to block people from organizing unions?" And his answer was, "No, I'm not trying to block them. I don't really care." And I think it really riled a lot of people up because the question was, well, maybe you are blocking them. But then think about this: 6% of the population are unionized. With the tens of thousands of Starbucks stores, when those individual stores try to go unionized, it does not impact the P&L of Starbucks. And those employees are struggling. We see it at Amazon where they try to get a warehouse unionized. We see it at Starbucks. These unionization efforts are largely not terribly successful. And the reason for that is because the world has changed so much. There was a time when unions were successful. It was a time when you needed people to work together. You needed to get them in there on an assembly line, making a car, getting something done, right? And what they did was they found out that they could collectively kind of say, "Hey, look, if we want to get paid more, we'll just threaten to shut the assembly line down, and then the management will have to agree to raise our pay." But we don't work like that anymore, right? I mean, assembly lines are largely roboticized, and
Yeah.
the parts are
It's a
being put
different
on
thing
by.
altogether.
Yeah, and the person operating those robots is a very smart person who doesn't think of themselves as a grease monkey standing on an assembly line. People who work in manufacturing today often wear white jackets all day long, right? And they program computers and they monitor the performance of the robots, and they're making sure that the mechanics are all being taken care of correctly. These are very sophisticated jobs, and they aren't people who feel like, oh, there's 10 of us in this building keeping this factory going. There's 12 in that building next door. Maybe we should get the 25 of us together and talk about whether we need a union for over lunch.
Yeah.
Your mind doesn't even go there. Where we used to clearly say there's blue collar work and white collar work? No, it's not like that anymore, right? What we used to think of as blue collar, pretty much white collar in many, many ways today,
Yeah.
right? So again, we have to realize that the world has changed so much, and be sure that you look at the right statistics. That 10.1% of the workers are unionized is a meaningless number. What's important is this: there's 6% in the private sector and 30% in the public sector. So it's really not an important trend, and you really don't need to worry about it. And I wouldn't be spending much time on it. And I wouldn't get in fights over it, and at a very, very, very local level, perhaps you might be something that you'd be concerned about for one particular plant in your supply chain. But overall, again, this is not a trend that is changing direction anytime soon. Yes, there's a shortage of workers. Workers overall have more clout now, and we see this. People saying, "Yeah, if you're going to pay me $8 to flip a hamburger, I don't think so. I'll do." Then they go from place to place to place until they find the job that's 15 or 17 or $22.
Yeah.
And so that's how you're going to keep people employed these days, is you're going to be able to keep them productive and pay them the money they need so that they can feel like it's worthwhile for them to go to work.
Yeah. What's interesting is here's another statistic. So, according to the World Economic Forum, there's a Future of Jobs Report 2020, I believe. They said that AI was going to replace 85 million jobs worldwide in the next 3 years. But that sounds like crazy, right? But what people don't latch on is the second part is that there'll be 97 million new jobs in that same time frame.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
everybody always latches on to that soundbite of, oh my God, the sky is falling. But if you really look at the bigger picture, there's so many jobs right now that need to be filled. AI and all these other things that we talk about it won't even come close to meeting the needs of the economy.
yeah. So again, back, let's kind of start wrapping this up. When they ask people about pay, how important is pay in your job? Back in 2015, 41% of people said that pay was the most important thing in their job. So they were thinking about coworkers, benefits, culture of the company, things like that. So 41% said pay. This year, that number went to 64%. Said pay is the most important thing.
Really
So
interesting.
now, what are we starting to see? We're starting to see that we have a heterogeneous America, right? We got people with different religious backgrounds, different points of view about patriotism. We see that people no longer, barely are Republicans and Democrats more than the independents. The independents are almost a bigger number than the Republicans and Democrats combined, right? So we have this heterogeneous world in which people are getting along by getting along with the fact that they're different. It's we're different, but we're the same, but we're different. And you're going to have to appeal to me based upon what I want. And work now is something that people do for money. This whole idea of the corporate man of the 1950s, that died so long ago, right? I'm going to spend lifetime working for the Boeing Corporation or the General Motors Corporation. We knew that died long, long time ago with the layoffs and the cutbacks and exporting jobs, manufacturing jobs offshore, offshoring, that sort of thing. So what we now can look at is that there is still, a powerful group of people in America, but what identifies them more? Well, they're more identified with their ability to be independent and be mobile, right? They get more value out of working asynchronously, kind of interacting when they can with other people, than out of trying to get together in a group at a location like a factory or a workplace and identifying, oh, we're part of the Abbott Corporation or the Blue Cross Blue Shield Corporation, and we work in this building, right? So they're now much more individualized. They're much more mobile, getting around. And what they're looking towards is, I really go to work for pay. So what's the pay? How much are you giving me? I know that I'm probably not going to. I know I'm not going to work here my whole life. I probably won't work here more than 2 or 3 years, maybe 5, 6. It's likely not be very long. If I'm sitting here investing in culture and those things that I thought were important 15 years ago, what I know is that's not going to stick around. Really, I'm here for the pay, and what that leads people more towards is saying, "Hey, if I want to be mobile, independent, work asynchronously, I need to be part of the gig economy because the gig economy gives me more of those things that I want than I had before. And now, if I'm in the gig economy, I don't have to use the tools my employer provides me. I can use whatever tools are in the world to be successful, whether it's Zoom or whether it's LinkedIn or whether it's Chat GPT, whatever technologies out there, I can grab it and I can use it. And so we're seeing that is really where America is sitting. And so if you're a business person, you no longer can reach back to a lot of those old road markers, right?
Yeah.
Are you Democrat? Are you right wing? Are you Christian? Are you Catholic? Those things are meaningless today. They don't have a majority of the population in any of those buckets. They are segments. And if you have particular products or solutions that appeal to that segment, you have to be very clear. You have to say, okay, like you said, if I want to sell, there's a television, I tend to watch on Sunday morning Fareed Zakaria, and there's always an ad on that show every single week for, if you write Christian books, call us. We publish Christian books. Now, there is no mistake what they're saying, right?
Right.
They don't beat around the bush. They don't hedge it. They don't say, send us your newest thoughts about how to be a great Buddhist or any other religion. They say, we publish Christian books. If you're a Christian author, call us. And that's, if you need to know your customer so that you can be very clear to them. They know their customer, they know their segment, and that's who they're trying to appeal to. And that's what we have to do work at today, is getting to the closest we can towards identifying who the customer is so that we can identify their needs and appeal to their needs. Not try to appeal to these larger Zeppelin-like tropes that worked in marketing in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Those tropes just don't work anymore.
Very well said, Adam. I think it's clear to our listeners and viewers that you've got to really understand who your customers are from a foundational level without putting these titles and these categories on them. And with that, Adam, have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.